Supports in Genshin Impact are some of the most impactful characters that you can have on your account. After all, every team is traditionally made of 1 on-fielder and 3 off-fielders, present Moika dual DPS meta excluded. So today, we're going to talk about the best supportive 5 stars in Genshin Impact, and go through all the things they bring to a team, how powerful and flexible they are, to help you decide which one is right for your account. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. By the way, we've just launched exclusive Patreon content. If you want to check it out, I'll have it in the pinned comment below. And while you're down there, please subscribe. We're almost at 100,000, so every single one counts. I did this kind of sheet comparison for just Furina and Xilonen in my Furina versus Xilonen video, but I wanted to put it all together because I also wanted to talk about Citlali and Escoffier and also throw Kazuha in the ring too to see how he stacks up. For the damage category, Furina and Escoffier are basically the only actual damage dealers in this list. Citlali and Kazuha both do not amazing but not terrible damage. It's not totally negligible, but Escoffier and Furina really do great sub DPS damage, enough that you build them on crit, you build them for damage, you want them to get buffed if possible, and they're similar in damage to more dedicated off-field characters, Chiori, Emily, Yelan, etc. So Furina and Escoffier definitely win in the damage department. In the damage bonus buff given, all the characters give a very similar amount of damage bonus, around 40%, with Escoffier not giving any. Every character on here is going to have a trade-off. This one is Escoffier's. For resistance shred, Furina does not give any. Xilonen gives 36%. Kazuha gives 40%, Citlali gives 20%, and Escoffier gives 55%. They all have some different conditions. Kazuha requires to swirl, Citlali does only Pyro and Hydro, Escoffier does only Hydro and Cryo, and you have to have all Hydro and Cryo in the party. If you take out a Hydro Cryo, it goes down to 15%. If you take out another Hydro Cryo, it goes down to 5%, or it goes down to 10%, and then 5% if she's the only Hydro or Cryo in the party. I don't know who I would say wins the damage buff category. I mean, Furina is slightly higher and it's more unconditional, so I guess I would give the winner to Furina. Note that Citlali and Xilonen do so through the artifact set, as does Kazuha. And if you have another scroll user, then Xilonen will need to go with Archaic Petra, and Citlali can go with Instructors or something like that. I think a lot of people go with scroll anyways though, because she needs the energy. So overall, maybe the winner goes to Furina, assuming you have a healer on the team. The winner for resistance shred, I mean, it's tough. They all have their little restrictions. I would probably give it to Xilonen, because even though it's less than, for example, Escoffier, it works for any element, period. Okay, not period. It needs to be an element that's reactable with Geo, so not Dendro, basically. But I mean, Escoffier does the most, and it's basically unconditional as long as you fulfill the party limitation. So you could give the win to Escoffier as well, but I think Xilonen maybe is a bit more flexible. For defensive utility, Escoffier's got everyone beat. Citlali and Xilonen provide some, Citlali giving a shield and Xilonen giving single target healing, which is enough to get a decent amount of Furina's damage bonus. However, Escoffier gives a team-wide heal and then continuous single target healing after that first team-wide burst heal. So she's able to enable Furina's buff. And of course, Furina fulfills one of the Hydro/Cryo slots on the team, so they're a perfect synergy together. Kazuha does not give any defensive utility, and Furina gives anti-healing. But, I mean, assuming you're partnering her with someone like Escoffier or Xilonen or even Bennett, you're going to be able to offset that. But yes, it is anti-healing from Furina. So Escoffier definitely wins the defensive utility section. For elemental application, Furina's is mostly useful, occasionally not useful. Hydro is generally a good element to apply. Only rarely is it a negative. Xilonen sort of gets out of the way and lets everyone else apply elements, which is a totally valid thing to do. Kazuha can be used to apply like extra Pyro to get more consistent vapes, or Electro, you get more aggravates. That's more about damage, but it can be useful. It's not like always useful. Citlali, it's sort of baked into her kit that it's very necessary to keep up a cryo application so that you can melt, and she does a good job of that. And Escoffier also does an excellent job of applying cryo, although hers is more for freeze, but could potentially work for melt as well. At the restrictions, Xilonen is definitely the least restrictive character. Kazuha needs to be on field to resistance shred. 10 seconds isn't a long enough resistance shred for most full rotations of most teams, and requires you to always end your rotation with Kazuha, which can be annoying. Citlali is restricted in the sense that she only prefers melt. Escoffier also is restricted that she wants cryo hydro, and Furina is restricted because she needs a healer. So overall, everyone's kind of got their thing, basically except for Xilonen. She just needs to react with the buffable element, which is generally no big deal. She can't have more than one Geo teammate, which usually isn't a problem, but can be for someone like Ito. But overall, you know, Xilonen is definitely the least restrictive character. For quality of life, they all have different things. Furina's damage lasts forever. It follows you around. She has a little bit of AoE. She buffs your whole team. She does hurt your party, which is a negative quality of life. Makes your team squishier. Xilonen's buff applies to all enemies, even if you only hit one. It's team-wide buffing. It applies in multi-wave. Kazuha has great grouping. It is great grouping. Can't deny it. Citlali's buff also applies to enemies in multi-wave. It's also team-wide buffing. Cryo application follows you. Escoffier, dummy-proof damage, res shred, healing, application. So, sorry, all of her things that she does is dummy-proof. Like, it just happens. You don't have to react with anything. You don't have to fulfill any sort of condition. As long as the team conditions are filled, everything on her kit comes to fruition. And what I expect, because we obviously don't have her yet to play with, I expect her numbers that she's cheating to actually come to fruition in reality, because all of her stuff is not like you have to do a little dance and be in Natlin and be the tall female model to make sure that you get all the buffs. You know what I mean? It's just unconditional buffs. And also her damage also follows the active character, like I said, for Furina. Overall, with quality of life, they all have pretty good quality of life, but I'm going to say that Escoffier overall wins out, I think, but we're going to have all of this is subject to change because we have to actually test the character, and assuming they aren't nerfed like crazy, they all have good quality of life. But I think Escoffier's, she sort of has everything. She doesn't, like, if you think about Xilonen, sometimes you don't have the element applied. For same with Kazuha, you know, his buffs don't apply in multi-wave. You know, Citlali, like, yeah, her cryo application's good, but sometimes you still will miss a melt because you messed up, or if the enemy has something on them, like element already on them, so it's harder to apply the cryo, so you might miss a melt here or there. Whereas Escoffier, it seems like everything just works. As long as you put in the right team, everything comes to fruition, is what it seems like. We'll see when it actually comes out. For vertical investment, Furina has an incredible Constellation 1 and 2. Xilonen has a good Refinement 1 weapon and a good C2. Kazuha, good R1, okay C2, not recommended pulling for it's sort of an outdated constellation compared to the new ones. Citlali is an incredible C2. Escoffier definitely has a good C1. She gives 60 crit damage for cryo characters, which is definitely good. And I'm not exactly sure how like her C1 and C2 actually stack up number-wise against these other ones. I do believe it's going to be quite good, but I don't want to speak to it until I see full calculations. And then exploration, we've got Furina doing walking on water. Xilonen's able to climb walls. Kazuya gives a little double jump. Citlali can like float around, I guess. And I don't know if Escoffier has anything. Maybe she can do an ice bridge with her skill. Not sure. Overall, although it is really cool that Furina can walk on water, I think it's more useful to be able to climb cliffs, personally. It can be useful to walk on water for sure, but I think climbing cliffs is just a little bit more universal, and she just does such a good job at it. So I'm going to give the overall exploration to Xilonen, just for fun. It doesn't mean much, but total wins. So if we tally up total wins, I get Xilonen and Escoffier with 5, Furina with 4, and Kazuha and Citlali with each of 2. Obviously, this is not an actual ranking as to which one is the best, although it's fun to look at anyways. Because of course, to actually rank characters, we can't really rank them just by looking at their kit. It has to be in context of the teams they can enable, so let's talk about those next. So when we look at who has the best teams, there's something we have to consider, and that's peak potential versus overall flexibility. Because there's no doubt when you look at right now, Citlali has the best teams in terms of peak potential. Moika DPS has far and away the best damage in the game. It's not even close, frankly. And Citlali needs her flowers. She is a big reason for that. Of course, she also shows up in very excellent teams, such as Chaska teams, even non-Moika ones, as well as being part of Arlecchino's best team. She's also best for characters like Gaming and Diluc, with Gaming consistently being one of the top tier DPSs. And Citlali does work on a bunch of other teams. She's a great option for Novelette, and she enables the hated Moeka Citlali wheelchair core where you just throw them on any other team. So I really think you can't underrate Citlali as far as being a really strong support and having really strong teams. Granted, the sheer number of teams is absolutely dwarfed by Furina. Just looking at number of teams that she's at least a solid option on: Navia, Ito, Mizuki, Chaska, Wanderer, Xiao, Varesa, Ayaka, Ganyu, Eula, Clorand, Sino, Yai, Raiden, Keqing, Alhaitham, Kinich, Tinari, Mualani, Novelette, at least 150. She's also good with Nilou, Ayato, Linny, Arlecchino only at C2. She's solid with Moeka, Kokomi, Yoimiya, Hutao, Klee, Risley. Like, Furina is freaking good with everybody. But who is she top meta with? Well, if we look at pre-Escoffier, like, her top teams really is just Novelette, with her being very good for a bunch of others. But really, like, Novelette is like the only S tier team that Furina is really a part of, or at least like a non-negotiable part. But she just has so many really strong options. And also it completely changes if you get her C1. If you get her C1, a lot of those options become best in slot, and even more so with C2. And with Escoffier, now all of a sudden, Ayaka is meta. Skirk is probably going to be meta. Ganyu and Risley will actually have good teams, and Furina will be best in slot for them. Yeah, I mean, Furina's best in slot for other characters now, such as Hutao, Yoimiya, Alhaitham, Xiao, and more. Nothing quite on the level of what Citlali's tops teams are, but then there's Furina. Xilonen is sort of in between. She has more higher tier teams than Furina, but she has less overall teams than Furina, and she has more teams overall than Citlali, but she doesn't have as many best teams as Citlali. So she's kind of a middle ground in terms of teams. If we look at the two types of teams that I'm considering, which is number of teams and strength of teams, Shilonen's kind of the middle ground. Kazuha is still very strong. He's sort of like usually a Xilonen downgrade. So basically, unless you need grouping, or unless you want to run both of them, like in the case of Novelette, where you run Xilonen and Kazuha, most of the time he's not the number one choice, but he's still a very good choice on lots of teams. And then finally, Escoffier. She's going to be best in slot for Cryo and Hydro, and she really raises up the value of Furina, and she also really needs Furina to function. So this is where it's kind of muddy. Is it Escoffier that revitalizes Furina, or is it Furina that enables Escoffier to be good in the first place? This is where this idea of who is the better support kind of falls apart, because they rely on each other to function. Just like Xilonen and Furina, to a degree, on a bunch of teams rely on each other to function, the answer is not as clear. But if we were to rate number of teams, I think it'd be something like this, and I would give Furina maybe another win. And if we look at strength of teams, it's something like this, and we can give another win to Citlali. Again, this is so arbitrary and so whatever, but it's kind of fun again. The final thing I want to talk about is replaceability. If you don't have one of these 5 stars, who can you replace them with in terms of a more accessible character, either another 5-star or ideally a lower constellation 4-star? Well, for melt teams, Citlali is very hard to replace. Sure, you can use Diona, I've used Ayaka sometimes. She's very hard to replace until maybe Escoffier. Maybe Escoffier can be a budget melter enabler because she has such good cryo application. I'm not saying for sure it will be, but I will be trying Moeka Melt with Escoffier instead of Citlali. If you think about it, if you look up here, right, she has great cryo application. Citlali, she does hold the scroll, so you're giving up scroll, but you're only getting 5% less resistance shred. And if you run another character, well, actually, no, she doesn't reduce pyro res at all. So let's say then, forget it, forget the resistance shred. Let's say you replace Citlali with Xilonen, and you have Escoffier. So it's Xilonen, Escoffier, Bennett, Moeka. Well, you're still getting Escoffier's sub DPS damage. You're getting the healing, which doesn't really matter, but you're getting the cryo application. You're still getting the scroll because Xilonen has the scroll, and you're still getting 36% resistance shred and 5%, so 41% resistance shred. I could see it being still quite good. It could be, it probably should be the best non-Citlali melt option. So that makes Citlali a little bit more replaceable. Okay, so that's Citlali's replaceability. Kazuha can be replaced by Shilonen and kind of vice versa. They can also often be replaced by Sucrose. If you don't have Bennett on the team already and it's an attack scaling team, that's an option. Yansan is an option if we look at Moika teams. Lanyan is also an option. If you have C4, it's a lower EM buff than Sucrose, but she provides a shield, so at least that. So both Kazuha and Shilonen have some replaceability. With Kazuha, any other replacement, you lose a lot of grouping. With Shilonen, any other replacement, you're losing a lot of just like general ease of use, quality of life for multi-wave, multiple enemies, etc. Furina is pretty hard to replace in most teams. If a team needs Furina, there's not much that can give that type of damage bonus plus damage, but Shilonen is often a possible replacement. You know, you can just replace her with kind of other buffers. Nothing does exactly what she does, but that's another option. Well, I say that, and then there's Yelan, who does actually do what she does, except that she does require, you know, a character to be able to normal attack, which a bunch of characters don't. Like Novelette, Yelan isn't a very suitable replacement for Novelette teams, but for a lot of teams she is. But also a lot of teams that you would want to use Yelan on, you'd also want to use Furina on, so that is something as well. And we kind of know about these Escoffier replacements that we have right now. This is $130. That's crazy. So like, if you want to know what it's like to not have a Escoffier, just, you know, take a look at your account right now and see how you feel. But I think for Ayaka and Risley and other cryo teams, it's going to be really, really hard to replace Escoffier. And on those teams, you need Furina too. They work as a tandem, as a duo. It's going to be very, very hard to replace either of them. Something a lot of people aren't talking about with Escoffier is how good her teams will be outside of just strictly freeze, and how good she'll be with sort of just the Furina, Yelan core, for example. The Furina, the Novelette team people have been talking about. Who can we use as a Escoffier? Maybe Layla can be a Escoffier. So this is going to be a good Novelette team, although if you have C1 Novelette, if you have R1, if you have good artifact investment in your Novelette, traditional Novelette Hyper will probably be better. But I saw some calculations that this would be Wanderer's new best team with Escoffier, Furina, Wanderer, Farzan. Seems a bit wild, but more power to you, I guess, if that ends up actually being his best team. Makes me feel like we're going to get a new best teammate for someone like Wanderer. I really don't see them letting this be his best team for too long. I've seen something like this be one of Hu Tao's much stronger options. I don't know if it'll be better than with Shilonen, but it'll be a very strong option. So you can actually kind of think of Escoffier as a Shilonen replacement. Is Escoffier a potential Shilonen replacement? If you look at my video, Escoffier will replace Shilonen for the cryo characters. She kind of can for Hu Tao, kind of can for Novelette. She does for Ayaka. She can't for Raiden, probably. Nah. Like, she doesn't for, like, Alhaitham. Definitely not Mualani or Navia. But she is, like, a valid replacement. And another thing that makes Shilonen a bit more easy to replace is that a bunch of those teams, like we said, you can also replace Shilonen with Escoffier and get pretty good results, probably. And I guess the final thing that we could keep in mind for Escoffier is that she has the potential to be even more meta in the future with Skirk's kit, with potentially the Cryo Archon coming out. Escoffier really could be one of the peak characters in Genshin. So who is the least replaceable, or who is the most replaceable? Replaceability. Furina is hard to replace, medium to replace, easy to replace, hard to replace, hard to replace, something like this. 6, 6, 6. Oh, and a 4. Whew. Oh no, I said that she's medium to replace. All right, so there's my rating on the different characters. Now the question is, who should you get? So in terms of who to pull, I did want to put together a little cheat sheet. So here it is. You can generally use this to determine which support you should go for, but you also want to consider what I said before is the replaceability factor. And different supports are replaceable in different ways for different characters. And there's other supports that are not on here that are more important for characters. I'm gonna make who is the best team for every character video. I don't know if I'll do it by element or I'll do it for just every character in one video. I think I'm leaning towards every character in one video, or maybe I'll split it into two if there's too many. But this is a little cheat sheet. Mostly the characters who want Shilonen, just Shilonen, these characters really want Shilonen. Mualani and Navia really need her. It's almost a non-negotiable. For Novelette, Hu Tao, Yoimiya, and Ito, they all want Furina plus Shilonen, and kind of to varying degrees. Like Novelette, especially if you're C1, if you're refinement 1 weapon, if you have good artifacts, if you're considering Moika Citlali with that team, or if you're putting that on another side, Like, there's lots of different things to consider as to how replaceable it is. Plus, you're always going to be making two sides for the Abyss. So you may want to get all of the supports. For example, maybe not Kazuha, since I ended up putting no one in best in slot with Kazuha. He's still a good character to generally get. It's just like, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, you have this character, they need Kazuha. You know, it just doesn't, you know, none of the characters jump out to me in that way. But you still need two Abysses, and having characters that go with multiple is really nice. So like, you know, you're building a bunch of freeze teams, but you also like to play melt. You know, maybe you don't get Citlali and you get a Escoffier instead because she can do both, assuming when she comes out we test it and she actually can do both. You know, since so many characters want Farina, you know, maybe even though it might not be as optimal as other teams, maybe you get Farina because she works on more teams. Maybe you skip Shalonen and go for Escoffier instead because you really want your Kraus to shine. Or maybe you skip Escoffier and go for Shalonen instead because you really want your Navia and Mulangi to shine, and you'd rather, you know, you don't care as much about your cryo characters. As Genshin gets more and more characters, this gets harder and harder to do, especially with more and more meta characters. The branching paths and the amount of depth of knowledge required to know who to pull is getting more and more challenging. So let me know if this video is helpful for you and what kind of changes or additions you'd like to see for this type of video in the future. So I'm doing my best, but there's a lot of ground to cover. Try not to pull for a minimal increase in power. It's Escoffier today, but who knows what it's going to be tomorrow. So make sure, and all of these characters are good enough to be viable components of great teams. So that's what I think. Let me know your thoughts. Subscribe and check out the Patreon. And if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.